Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we are going to talk about F. Wesley Snyder's Dragonlance: Shadow of the Dragon Queen, and we're going to talk a little bit more about refugees and dealing with refugees in times of crisis. Which again, it's pretty incredible that Dungeons and Dragons is telling this story when Ukrainian refugees are a very real thing, and I'm an evangelical Christian. I don't know if you know this, but evangelicals don't sit around while the world burns. We actually help people, and so there were a lot of churches that opened that literally were we got to, who has an extra room in their house? We're going to take in a Ukrainian refugee. This happened all over the country, and there were thousands of Ukrainian refugees that were received by American people in American churches, right? American evangelicals, right? So evangelicals are very complicated. They're a complicated group, right? They caused a lot of problems in the 1983 with the Satanic Panic, but then they've continued, and this is the issue, right? People who are spiritually engaged, they move, they take actions. They don't just sit around and do nothing, right? They're gonna do good or they're gonna do bad, right? And there was a misguided energy in 1983, and what they did was quite evil, right? But one of the reasons why I'm an evangelical is a lot of times they do really good things, right? So and I own that history, first of all, I was very fortunate. My parents were not part of the Satanic Panic. I was only 13 when it happened, right? But it's quite interesting. So let's talk about Chapter 4, Shadows of War, and let's talk about what Governor Miot, the governor of Kalamon, decides to do with the Vogler refugees. So he decides, okay, so the Vogler refugees arrive, okay? And Lord Vicaris comes in and wastes Governor Miot's time with a bunch of lies and an attempt to usurp Mayor Raven Uth Vogler's position, right? And Governor Miot kind of dismisses him when the player characters arrive, when the group of heroes, the player characters, Mayor Raven, Knight of Solamnia Becklin, Knight in Training Darrett, and specifically mercenary captain Cudgel Ironsmile, right? So they all show up and they're like, hey, here's the real deal, right? So Governor Miot says, okay, you got all these Vogler people here, right? There's literally hundreds of you guys, and you want something from us, right? And so he says, so he hears the request. He's like, and Mayor Raven's like, we need help, right? And I don't think she even qualifies it. She's like, we need help. So he thinks it over and he says, this is what I'm going to do for you, okay? I'm going to do 3 things for you. 1, I'm going to give you shelter outside the walls. This is very important. Outside the walls, right? This is our nice city of Kalamon, right? We got the harbor beacons, we got the trade city, we got the wall, right? You dirty refugees got to stay outside the wall, right? You're like, dude, that's a little cruel. Why can't they come inside the walls? They were just attacked by the Red Dragon Army, and actually nobody knows the Red Dragon Army yet, right? They just know they were attacked by an outside force. But you're still going to be just outside. We're going to keep you outside the wall. No safety for you, right? Or actually limited safety. Because what else does he say? So you guys are going to be able to stay outside the wall. Set up your shantytown. Enjoy, right? And you're like, oh man, that's coming out that's not cool, right? But then he's like, but we're going to bring food out, right? Like, we know you came here with nothing but what you have in your hands, right? You literally are going to starve to death if we don't give you something. So we're going to feed you, right? So they're like, hey, shantytown outside the walls, and that's not nothing. It's close to nothing, and it's incredibly insulting, but it's not nothing. And here's the other part. Night dispatch, right? So if y'all are attacked, maybe half a dozen to a dozen of you die. That'll be enough for us to dispatch our knights, and we'll come out and help you, right? So we're going to limit your deaths to a half dozen or a dozen, right? And you're like, whoa, man, that's pretty harsh, right? But here's where it gets interesting, right? The Ukraine-Russia war, right? Like, America is like, hey, man, we do not like seeing communism just roll out, right? And, take a whole bunch of countries and, continue to spread. We don't really like that. That's not cool, right? And so America has been sending weapons, right? And no boots on the ground. And we're definitely Governor Miating Ukraine. We're like, we're going to help you, but not that much help. We're like, and so that's what Governor Miat does, right? He's like, y'all, you dirty refugees can stay outside the wall. We'll give you food, and we will dispatch knights if a few of you die, right? We'll use your deaths as a trigger to protect you, right? And you're like, and here's where it gets really weird, right? Because you want to really frown and say, that's not cool, man, right? Like, but on the flip side, he's not doing nothing, right? The food is very real. You can't take exception. Like, these aren't his people, right? But he is committing to feeding them, right? And he is using the surplus of Kalamon to aid Wagner, right? And it's the same thing. Like, America is aiding Ukraine. It's helping Ukraine, but it's kind of close to nothing, right? Like, we should really be boots on the ground, and we should help Zelensky push across all of Russia, defeat all of Russia, and then Zelensky's headquarters switch from Ukraine to Moscow, and Ukraine, which now spans every inch of Russian land, now becomes a favored nation. That sounds good to me, right? And maybe Zelensky's like, hey, a third of the Russian land is now yours as well, America. And you guys can set up 10 new states, 10 new American states in the middle of Russia. That would be real help, right? Boots on the ground, win the war in a week, because that's what would happen. We would absolutely destroy Vladimir Putin, right? Like, he's having a tough time with a dude using surplus U.S. weapons and wearing a green T-shirt, right? If America shows up in Russia, we take that whole country in a week, and we just hand it to Zelensky as a tchotchke, right? Like, that's what happens, right? And so this outside the wall thing is really, really fascinating. And I fully, and I'll tell you right now, we know for a fact there were still actually, it's a good question. By the numbers, there was still writing being done on Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen when we reached this point in its creation. So so I really think F. Wesley Snyder was making very clear statements about the Ukrainian-Russian war and America's relationship with Ukraine in Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. Every word of that is my humble opinion, but what's important is when I hear your humble opinion. When you get into the comments, send your traffic, and please consider liking and subscribing.